So what we look at here is the fact that in the first instance, in a readiness plan itself, identify your crisis management team. And this really is a very crucial first step, because ideally they should come from various departments. They also should have a sufficient seniority level. And why is that necessary? Because when you are in a crisis situation and you need to make decisions, what you cannot afford as the crisis management team is particularly, let's say, junior member. And there's no disrespect to the junior members. But if you are a very hierarchical organization and you need that junior member to check in, and you put that junior member into your crisis management team, then obviously the junior member will have to check back. And with regards to time, time is not on your side when it comes to a crisis. So please bear in mind, when you're selecting members of the team for a crisis management team, ensure that they have sufficient seniority and also a company culture that allows them to make a decision. The second thing is, within the crisis communication team, have you appointed that spokesperson? Now, different crises, as we go along in this overview, will require a different spokesperson. But within the crisis communication team, there should be one main spokesperson. So now what do I mean by that? If it's cybersecurity, the people affected by this cybersecurity attack may not necessarily want to hear from the CEO. So it's great, CEO apologizes, for example, if they really have found out that it was my mistake as a company, I as the CEO will come out. But you know what I need to bring with me? I need to bring my IT guy, my head of tech to come, because that would be the main spokesperson for a cyber attack. But my main spokesperson for a cyber attack would still need to liaise with my main spokesperson from the crisis management team. And have you trained these people? Are they media trained to be able to answer questions, address the issues? Have you trained your receptionist to know how do you answer calls to make sure that if there's any crisis, this is what I need to do? The next thing is, have you established your contacts list and emergency response? I can't tell you how essential that is, and to constantly update that list. Because when we were in crisis mode, whether it was SARS or whether it was a diplomatic incident, it was the ability and the, you go into SOP mode, it's standard protocol mode. That's what you kick into, and you really want that. Because I'm sure with those of you who have handled crisis, for me, my stomach goes cold, and you really are very grateful for that training and the simulation exercises that have taken place, because you know exactly who to contact and what the emergency response is. The next one is also the communications means. What does that mean? It means, are you all always WhatsApping each other? What if WhatsApp goes down? What if you can't get contacted on WhatsApp? What are the established means of communication you have set up with your crisis team members? And the protocol, meaning who's going to respond first? Where are you all assembling also? That's the other question that brings us to the physical and virtual meeting points. Have you considered, and I would say that if I was doing this webinar before COVID took place, the virtual part would have factored in much smaller. But I think COVID has taught us that a physical meeting point is not always possible. And also with cloud infrastructures, that a virtual meeting point where your crisis comms team can congregate, where would your office members be able to so-called congregate in this virtual world? Have you set up that virtual meeting point? Okay. The sixth thing is, of course, third-party collaboration. And what does that mean? I've had to go through a huge retrenchment exercise for one of my companies where you've had to retrench a whole lot of people. Now, you may have received as the C-suite member 3 months notice, you know that it's going to happen. Pre-crisis, you know that you're going to have a whole lot of people who are being without jobs. Have you set up counseling? Have you set up work collaboration measures with people who can help them with their resumes? Have you set up all of these third-party collaborative relationships so that when it does take place, you have these people, you can pick up the phone and say, hey, so-and-so, on such and such a date, I'll need you and your team members to come down. We're going to need you from such and such a time. This is what the contract says. Are you able to mobilize the people required? And that's what we mean by the third-party collaborative relationships. The community relationships. Do you know who to call? It's very much like Ghostbusters. In crisis communication, think Ghostbusters. Who are you going to call? How are you going to call them? How are you going to talk to them? How are you going to connect? And if you don't have those answers, work on your pre-crisis communication, work on the community relationships. If you have pregnant women, and let's say there's a woman falls, emergency crisis, does the receptionist, do the people know exactly what are the numbers to call? When there is a person who is infected by a particular virus, do you have your protocols in place? Do you know what to do? So, and again, media relationships are also part of the third-party collaboration. Has your corporate communications team and PR team started establishing media relations? So for example, do they know who to call? If it's a spillage, for example, on the streets, and you know that the press, for example, one of the press members will call you, you would need to then be able to address this. And you say, I want to speak to the editor. Do you know who the editors are? Do you know what the focus of each newspaper and their tone of voice is? So that when your spokesperson goes up to address the press, they get a question from the Straits Times. Are they aware of the difference in tone of voice from the Straits Times and Mothership? Are they aware of the tone of voice that's different from CNBC and CNN? So those media relationships are just part of that third-party collaboration and understanding that needs to come in. It also links to the training and the simulation exercises. Training comes in because adequate training. Is it first aid? We always think first aid, right? But also now think pre-crisis communication, management training, and simulation exercises